He finds a women's shoe with a wacky outsole. This shoe became their highest selling shoe ever, with over 7 million pairs sold at the time. What's up guys, my name is Levi, this is Shred Shop, connecting you to skateboarding, and today we are going to do 14 things you didn't know about Airwalk footwear. As always, stick around for our favorite fact, the last one, 14th one. It's crazy this time. And every video we put out at the end, we're going to give you our favorite comment of the week. Jazzercise Inc. George Yon and Bill Mann were both very successful people in the shoe industry. In the 1970s, they had made over $12 million selling no-name shoes in the US shoe industry. In the 1980s, Jazzercise and aerobics were blowing up, and so they decided they were going to start their very own line of Jazzercise shoes. They both came together and started Jazzercise Inc. By the time they did a bunch of market research and marketing and brought shoes to the market, they realized that Reebok and Nike beat them to the punch, and they realized that they missed the boat and they weren't going to make any money in that industry. Jazzercise was also being taken over by Step Aerobics, so they went back to the drawing board. At the same time, Bill's son keeps complaining that his shoes are wearing out way too fast while skateboarding. He also says that he's sick of wearing the same boring white Reeboks to skate in. Bill realizes that the skateboard shoe market is relatively untapped, so he heads to the skate parks and the shoe stores to do some market research. The gnarly side of this is that Bill would actually go to the skate parks and take pictures of kids skating. So you imagine him getting out of his van, jumping the fence, taking pictures of kids skating, and then zooming in on the shoes to find out where they were wearing away. And then from this, in 1986, Airwalk Footwear was founded. Sin Egelja. Sinisa, or Sin, grew up surfing in Australia. And in 1979, he traded his surfboard for a skateboard. In the early 80s, he ends up moving to America and working at the Del Mar skatepark. He actually had a bad back injury from diving into a pool when he was a kid. So then he becomes a skateboard photographer instead. Through his job at the Del Mar skatepark, he becomes friends with Tony Hawk and all the other big name pros at the time. One day while at work, Bill Mann walks into Del Mar skatepark to research skateboard footwear. He ends up running into Sin and they end up hitting it off. From there, Sin gives input on skateboard shoe design, where shoes wear away, what skateboarders are looking for in a shoe. Through that, Bill ends up hiring him and he becomes the very first ever employee of Airwalk Footwear. Sin didn't have any experience in that industry, but he went on to be the team manager, designing ads, dealing with marketing, and dealing with magazines. Sin, after wearing so many hats, eventually moved into the design part of the shoe program. He designed legendary shoes like the One and the Gym, and he was a huge part in launching Airwalk snowboard boots. Sin stuck it out through many different management changes and changes of direction with the company. And then eventually after 16 years, he left when the focus of the brand shifted from skateboarding to a big box shoe brand. The name. The name was invented by a guy named Garry Davis, who was assistant art director at Transworld skateboarding magazine. Garry came up with the name while Tony Hawk was on the team. Tony did a lot of airwalks and it was his signature trick at the time. For coming up with the name, Garry was rewarded 6 pairs of shoes and a duffel bag. The logos. Cynthia Sebula, the art director, designs their logo to look like a side profile of a pterodactyl head. This logo was often confused for being an A for Airwalk, so they brought it back, went to the drawing board, and they ended up coming up with Ollie the Running Man as our new logo. This was also designed by Cynthia. She was Sin's roommate, and she became the first art director and graphic designer that Airwalk had. In the later days, they moved on from Ollie the Running Man to the circle with the A in it for their logo. Tony Hawk. Tony Hawk met Sin through Del Mar skatepark. They became friends, and he was the second ever team rider to be added to Airwalk. Apparently at the time, he was deciding between a newly formed shoe brand Airwalk or Puma. An interesting fact is that Tony released his very first ever shoe pro model under the Airwalk brand. In the late 80s, Airwalk approached Tony saying, "We want you to promote the very first ever pro skateboard shoe." Tony declined because he thought, man, that might be a little bit cheesy. He waited a few years, and then eventually, Etnies and Vans beat them to the punch. Then, in 1995, he got his first pro model shoe on Airwalk. He released 2 more pro model shoes with them before leaving to join the audio team. The team. Sin approaches Billy Ruff to be the very first ever team rider for the Airwalk shoe brand. After that, he obviously adds Tony Hawk, and the team keeps growing. At the time, they had the biggest team around, with over 70 team riders. They said because they paid a monthly salary, which most other shoe brands didn't, it was easy to grow the team. Over the years, their team included people like Tony Hawk, Rob Dyrdek, Jason Lee, Sluggo, Danny Way, Jeff Rowley, Andrew Reynolds, Bucky Lasek, Eric Costin, Christian Hosoi, Mike Vallely, Jeremy Ray, and a lot more. The shoes. Jason Lee releases the very first ever Airwalk Pro model in 1995. That's a few years after his standout part in Blind Video Days. The prototype. Sin talks to Chris Miller, who wasn't really happy with what Airwalk was putting out, and he was constantly skating in Jordan 1s. Sin takes the Jordan 1 in as a template, and he decided to make a skate shoe version. This shoe was designed by famed shoe designer Lenny Holden. They ended up naming it the Prototype while it was in transition while they were creating it, and the name just ended up sticking. They also designed the gym shoe, which was their take on a gym shoe, the NTS, or Not the Same shoes, and the Airwalk 1s. In the early 90s, Sin was tasked with designing a new skateboard shoe. So he went into the warehouse and he went through old designs that were left over from the old shoe designer. He finds a women's shoe with a wacky outsole, and then he takes it and starts making a few tweaks to it. This shoe became their highest selling shoe ever, with over 7 million pairs sold at the time. 7 million single shoes. After the success of Tony Hawk and Jason Lee's pro model shoes, 3 more pro models are released. They're handed out to Rune Glifberg, Steve Berra, and Jeff Rowley. On top of making skate shoes, Airwalk actually even made straight-up bowling shoes. The Airwalk video. In 1996, Airwalk comes out with a full-length team skateboard video filmed by Jamie Mossberg. He's also the filmer that Birdhouse used to film the iconic video, The End. The Airwalk video features team members like Andrew Reynolds, Bucky Lasek, Andy McDonald, Jeff Rowley, Steve Berra, Tom Knox, and Tony Hawk. Rapid growth. Airwalk saw massive growth at the beginning of the company. Within the first few years, they were seeing millions of their shoes being sold worldwide.
Prestige worldwide.
It's crazy to note that at their first trade show they ever did, they didn't get their crap together in time, so they didn't have samples for the trade show. So they actually took pictures of what the shoes would look like, framed them, and put them up in their booth. At that trade show, they sold over $1 million worth of shoes. By the end of 1987, Airwalk was selling over 100 different styles of shoes, and they were selling internationally. Most of the shoes retailed for $20 or $30 US, and so they were a very affordable option for skateboarders. Extreme sports. Extreme sports! Airwalk wanted to go into other extreme sports, so they looked around and they started with a BMX team. They networked with guys like Spike Jones at BMX events, and eventually they end up with team riders as big as Matt Hoffman on the team. After the BMX team, they start sponsoring surfers, snowboarders, base jumpers, and dirt bikers. In the mid-90s, Airwalk became the best-selling snowboard boot brand in the entire world. Some years selling almost 500,000 boots in 1 year. It's interesting to note that snowboarding at that point was the fastest growing sport in America. The ads. In the 90s, Airwalk was in the top 5 for spending budgets for ads. In 1995, they spent $30 million on ads, and then they boosted to $40 million in 1996 because they expected their sales to double. In this point, they're the 3rd biggest shoe company in the world behind Nike and Adidas. They were competing against these guys while at the same time dumping a bunch of money in to try to maintain the core status with the youth. Their ads always had a sense of humor to them. They had a different approach to advertising and marketing. Instead of just posting photos of their team riders snowboarding or skateboarding, they would dress them up in outfits and then make them play croquet or tennis and post that as an ad. Airwalk would pour a ton of money into hosting crazy and different events, all while trying to coordinate with different professional extreme sport athletes and their teams. They would host different skateboard contests and series, often spending around $80,000 making these events happen. In a Thrasher interview, Tony Hawk recalls being flown to Switzerland and Japan and places like that while holding vert demos alongside snowboard demos, while at the same time there was huge concerts happening. Victor Noveti. Airwalk did a huge ad campaign for a fake pro skater named Victor Noveti. This fake pro skater Vic was actually just Sin dressed up in different costumes. The pro skater named Vic came from an inside joke in Australia where they would call people Vic for being fashion victims. Uvete pole comes from the Yugoslavian word for new shoes. Lots of ads were Vic or Sin doing tricks that weren't even that possible, and the board was bolted to the ramps or the rails. The ads were jokes and they became very popular, but then they ended up giving Vic a pro model shoe, which wasn't popular at all and it ended up bombing. Commercials. Over the years, Airwalk had a ton of different commercials. In 1991, they dropped their first series of commercials, including vert skating, BMX, and surfing. Lots of their commercials in the 90s didn't actually include skateboarding at all. They ended up more focused on being funny and just super odd concepts. The commercials were more focused on keeping Airwalk cool and to maintain the reputation of a core street brand. The end of Airwalk. In the late 90s, the core identity of Airwalk started to experience issues. Their lineup of skate shoes became very stale, with not very much inspiration coming in. It started to cater more to the mainstream and big box stores and way less to skateboarders. The high-ups at Airwalk moved the brand from Carlsbad, California to Pennsylvania. This is the point where Sin left the brand. He said that George wanted to turn Airwalk into a stale, brown shoe company. He said he also remembers a quote of George saying Tony Hawk will never be as popular as Michael Jordan, and that he was sick of trying to sell shoes to skateboarders. This left a lot of room for other skateboard shoe brands to come in and take their market share that Airwalk had created. Tony Hawk said at this time the skateboard part in the offices kept getting moved and downsized over and over again, and it even became hard for him and other team riders to get free shoes from Airwalk. In 1992, Bill Mann, one of the founders and creators of the shoe brand, gets let go and ends up going to work for Vans. With new core shoe brands on the rise, Airwalk was banished from skate shops and pushed into the malls and the big box stores. The second coming of Airwalk. In 2002, Airwalk comes back and tries to reposition themselves as a classic skate shoe brand. Rob decides to bring back some classic team riders and classic silhouettes like Andy Mack, and then with the silhouettes, the One and other classic shoes. Even with recent nostalgia, it feels like Airwalk will be stuck in the 90s and that classic time. What do you think about Airwalk and their recent attempts to try to come back into skateboarding? And what do you think? Does Andy Mack, does he sleep in his yellow helmet? What are we talking here? Guys, that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. This is Levi from Shred Shop connecting you to skateboarding. And you just watched 14 things you didn't know about Airwalk shoes. Stay tuned for our comment of the week. But first, let me know below what other extreme sports brands should Airwalk have sponsored. Ho, comment of the week, it's a spicy one. We're talking really tons of cayenne pepper, diarrhea spicy. All right, it's from the dude, FMCDH. He says, lol, walking out of an after a New Year party to sit down and watch this video now. You guys rule. Thanks for the break from the noise, lol. I gotta say something to you. Yes, there's too much noise. New Year's party sucks. Sit at home alone, number one. Number two, thank you guys for the hype. Seriously, we get people saying, I'm watching from Italy or I'm watching from this part of the world. It gets us energized and gets us stoked to keep producing content for you. Because we're just local guys at a local shop in Canada, and we're hyped to just be doing this together with you guys. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Again, support us by liking and subscribing, and tell us what we should be reviewing and what we should be talking about next. Of course, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. Your bathroom, a different country, jail. Where are you watching us from?